The soft glow of fluorescent lights hummed in the empty hallways of Pearson Hall. Midnight had come and gone, and the mathematics building of Westridge University stood silent, save for the quiet shuffle of Miguel Reyes's worn work boots against the polished floors. The night janitor moved from room to room, his cart of cleaning supplies his only companion through the graveyard shift. Most nights, Miguel found comfort in the solitude. Tonight, something called him to Lecture Hall 118. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. He paused at the doorway, switching on the lights. The cavernous room with its tiered seating felt different in the emptiness, almost sacred. Miguel wheeled his cart inside, but before he could begin his routine, his eyes caught something on the massive chalkboard that stretched across the front wall. In the corner, almost hidden, were fragments of an equation. Not the usual homework problems or exam preparations, but something more intricate, something that seemed to twist and spiral through mathematical notation in a way that made Miguel's heart quicken. He set down his mop and walked closer, his calloused fingers hovering over the chalk marks. Most would have erased it without a second thought. That was the job, after all. But Miguel saw something in those symbols that others might have missed. A pattern, a rhythm, a doorway. Before anyone knew Miguel Reyes's name, before Westridge University would speak of him in hushed, reverent tones, before his story would change how we think about genius and opportunity, there was just this moment. A night cleaner standing before an unsolved equation, hearing a symphony that had been silent for 15 years. The mathematics department of Westridge University had a storied history. Its stone buildings had housed some of the brightest minds in theoretical mathematics for over a century. The faculty offices were lined with framed accolades, the hallways adorned with portraits of distinguished alumni who had gone on to solve some of the world's most perplexing problems. But none of them had solved the Donovan sequence, the infamous mathematical puzzle that had been proposed by the brilliant but reclusive mathematician William Donovan in the early 2000s. The problem remained unsolved for 15 years, becoming something of a legend within the mathematical community. Dr. Rebecca Collins had been fascinated by the Donovan sequence since her graduate studies. Now, at 42, with her own tenure at Westridge, she still found herself drawn to it, not out of ambition, but out of pure intellectual curiosity. The problem had a beauty to it, an elegance that transcended its complexity. Every few months, she would dust off her notes and spend a weekend lost in its patterns, only to set it aside again, no closer to a solution than when she began. On this particular morning in late October, Rebecca arrived at Pearson Hall just as the sun was beginning to cast long shadows across the campus quad. The mathematics building was nearly empty at 5:30 in the morning, but Rebecca preferred the quiet. It gave her time to think, to prepare, to exist in the space between night and day where her mind felt most alive. As she unlocked the door to Lecture Hall 118, where she would be teaching advanced calculus in a few hours, she noticed something unusual. The large chalkboard at the front of the room was covered in equations. This wasn't uncommon. Faculty often used the boards for their own work, but these weren't just any equations. These were fragments of the Donovan sequence, written in a hand she didn't recognize. Rebecca set her bag down and approached the board. The work was meticulous, the notation unlike anything she had seen before. It wasn't following the traditional approach to the problem. It was something entirely different, a lateral perspective that seemed to dance around the constraints that had trapped so many others. "What in the world?" she whispered, her eyes scanning the board. The work wasn't complete, but it was further along than anything she had seen published. There was an intuitive leap in the middle section, that bypassed years of computational dead ends, leading to a promising pathway she had never considered. She took out her phone and snapped several photos, then checked the time. Still an hour. Before anyone else would arrive, she wanted to understand as much as she could before the mysterious mathematician returned, if they returned. Rebecca sat in the front row, notebook open, and began to transcribe the work, adding her own annotations and questions in the margins. By the time students began filing in for her 8 a.m. class, Rebecca had reluctantly erased the board, but not before capturing every detail. Throughout her lecture, her mind kept drifting back to those equations. Who had written them? Why in her classroom? And most importantly, were they on the verge of solving what many had deemed unsolvable? The next morning, Rebecca arrived even earlier. The lecture hall was dark when she entered, turning on just enough lights to see the board. Her heart sank when she found it clean, wiped of any evidence of the previous day's brilliance. She was about to leave when she noticed a small marking in the corner, the same distinctive handwriting, a single line of notation that seemed to pick up exactly where yesterday's work had left off. For the next week, this became their dance. Each morning, Rebecca would arrive to find new progress, never a complete solution, but each day moving closer, building on what came before. She began leaving her own notes, questions, suggestions, encouragements, written in blue chalk she had brought from home. The mysterious mathematician never responded directly to her notes, but the work would subtly incorporate her suggestions, a silent acknowledgement of their growing collaboration. On Friday morning, Rebecca made a decision. She arrived at 4:30, even earlier than usual, with a thermos of coffee and a patient resolve. She turned on a single row of lights, took a seat in the back corner of the room, and waited. At exactly 5:45, the door opened. Rebecca held her breath as a man entered, his back to her as he switched on the light by the door. He wore the gray uniform of the university's maintenance staff, a name badge that she couldn't read from this distance. He wheeled in a cleaning cart, parked it by the wall, and then approached the board. For a moment, he simply stood there, studying the notes Rebecca had left. Then he reached into his pocket, pulled out a piece of chalk, and began to write. His movements were deliberate. Confident, he wasn't copying from notes or a book. The mathematics flowed from his mind to the board as naturally as breath. Rebecca watched in silence, afraid to break the spell. After nearly 20 minutes, she finally spoke. "You're the one who's been working on the Donovan sequence." The man froze, chalk still pressed against the board. Slowly he turned around, his eyes wide with alarm. He was in his mid-30s with deep brown eyes and dark hair flecked with early gray at the temples. His name badge read Miguel Reyes. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice soft but clear. "I know I'm not supposed to use the boards. I can clean it now." Rebecca shook her head, standing up. "No, please don't. Your work is remarkable. I'm Dr. Collins, Rebecca Collins. I teach in this room." Miguel looked down, suddenly aware of the chalk dust on his hands, on his uniform. "I should go. I'm supposed to be cleaning, not..." "How long have you been working on this problem?" Rebecca interrupted, walking toward him. Miguel hesitated. "A few years, mostly just in my head. I only started writing it down recently. In my classroom." A faint smile crossed his face. "The boards here are bigger than the ones in the other rooms." Rebecca laughed, relieved to break some of the tension. "Fair enough. But this isn't just any problem, Mr. Reyes. This is the Donovan sequence. People have built entire careers trying to solve it. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story." And Miguel's expression changed, his embarrassment giving way to genuine curiosity. "Is that what it's called?" I found it in an old journal article in the library. It just seemed interesting. Rebecca stared at him, trying to reconcile the man before her, a night cleaner with worn hands and tired eyes, with the mind that had produced the mathematical poetry on the board behind him. Interesting is a mild way of putting it. The Donovan sequence has been unsolved for 15 years. Some of the best mathematicians in the world have tried and failed. Miguel glanced back at the board, then at Rebecca. I didn't know that. I just saw a pattern that others might have missed. Where did you study mathematics? His eyes clouded. I didn't, not formally. Before Rebecca could respond, the door opened, and Frank Martinez, the head of the night maintenance crew, poked his head in. Miguel, you still in here? Shift ended 20 minutes ago? Miguel straightened. Sorry, Frank. I got distracted. I'll finish up now. Frank noticed Rebecca and nodded politely. Morning, Professor. Hope he's not bothering you. Not at all, Rebecca said quickly. We were just discussing some work on the board. Frank gave a good-natured chuckle. Better him than me. Numbers were never my thing. He tapped his watch. Don't forget, Miguel. Carmen's waiting for you at home. After Frank left, Miguel began gathering his cleaning supplies. Rebecca watched him, her mind racing. Mr. Reyes, Miguel, would you be willing to meet with me later? To discuss your work on this problem? He paused, uncertainty written across his face. I don't know if that's a good idea. I'm not. I mean, this isn't my world. Rebecca gestured to the chalkboard. This says otherwise. Please, just one conversation. The campus coffee shop, or wherever you'd be comfortable. Miguel seemed to be weighing something in his mind. Finally, he nodded. I have to take my daughter to school and then sleep for a few hours. I could meet at 2 at the public library downtown. They have a cafe on the first floor. The library at 2 it is, Rebecca confirmed, trying to contain her excitement. And Miguel, thank you for not erasing this yet. I'd like to study it a bit longer. After he left, Rebecca stood before the board, tracing the flow of his logic with her finger. There was an intuitive brilliance to it that defied conventional approaches. She took more photos, made more notes, and with each minute that passed, became more convinced that she had just met someone extraordinary. The Lakewood Public Library stood in stark contrast to the Gothic architecture of Westridge University. Built in the 1970s, its concrete and glass facade spoke to an era of functional modernism. Inside, however, it was warm and vibrant, having been renovated in recent years to create more communal spaces, while preserving the quiet corners that serious readers and researchers valued. Rebecca arrived early, securing a table in the corner of the first-floor cafe where they would have some privacy. She brought her laptop, a notebook, and a small stack of articles on the Donovan sequence that she thought might interest Miguel. At precisely 2 o'clock, he appeared, now dressed in jeans and a simple button-down shirt, rather than his work uniform. He carried a worn backpack and moved with a quiet confidence that seemed at odds with the uncertainty he had displayed earlier. You came, Rebecca said, unable to hide her relief. Miguel set his backpack down and took the seat across from her. I said I would. There was a moment of awkward silence before Rebecca pushed a cup of coffee toward him. I took a chance. Black, no sugar. He looked surprised but accepted it with a nod of thanks. Good guess. Miguel, Rebecca began, leaning forward slightly. I've been reviewing your work all morning. Your approach to the Donovan sequence is unlike anything I've seen published. You're taking a completely different path than most established mathematicians. His eyes lit up briefly before he tempered his expression. That's probably because I don't know the established approaches. I'm just following what makes sense to me. That's exactly what makes it so valuable. You're not constrained by conventional Methods. She opened her notebook. Can you tell me how you first encountered this problem? Miguel took a sip of his coffee, considering his words carefully. I clean the mathematics building 5 nights a week. Sometimes I look at what's left on the boards. Most of it I understand. Basic calculus, linear algebra. About 3 years ago, I found a partial statement of this problem written in the corner of a board in what you call Lecture Hall 118. It was just a fragment, but something about it caught my attention. So you started working on it? Not right away. I copied it down, took it home, started reading whatever I could find about it at the library. Most of the articles were behind paywalls or written in language I had to teach myself to understand. But gradually, I began to see the structure of it, like a piece of music that reveals itself the more you listen. Rebecca was captivated by his description. That's a beautiful way to think about mathematics. Where did you learn to think this way? Miguel's expression closed slightly. My grandmother was a mathematician. Not famous, not here. She taught at a small university in Mexico City. When I was a child, before we came to the United States, she would show me patterns in tiles, in music, in the way plants grow. She never called it mathematics, but that's what it was. And your formal education? He shifted in his seat. I finished high school, started community college, but had to stop. Life happened. There was more to that story, Rebecca sensed, but she didn't press. Instead, she turned her laptop around to show him the photos she had taken of his work that morning. This step here, she said, pointing to a particular sequence of notations, this is where you diverge most dramatically from conventional approaches. Can you walk me through your thinking? For the next hour, Miguel explained his methodology, growing more animated as he spoke. He used napkins to sketch additional steps, clarifying his reasoning with a precision that left Rebecca in awe. This wasn't just intuition, this was structured, rigorous mathematical thinking from someone who had developed his own language for expressing complex concepts. Miguel, she said when he finished, do you realize what you've done? You're more than halfway to solving a problem that has stumped the field for a decade and a half. He gave a modest shrug. Maybe. There are still gaps, especially in the middle section, where the sequence begins to fold back on itself. But you see a path forward? I think so. It's like climbing a mountain in fog. I can't see the summit yet, but I can see the next few steps. Rebecca took a deep breath. What she was about to propose could change both their lives, but she felt certain it was the right thing to do. I'd like to help you complete this work, Miguel, properly with resources and support. Would you consider becoming a research assistant in my department? His eyebrows rose in surprise. A research assistant? I don't have the qualifications. I don't have a degree. Qualifications can be waived in exceptional circumstances, and these are exceptional circumstances. She leaned forward. You have a rare gift, Miguel. The kind that shouldn't be confined to the hours between midnight and dawn, written on boards that get erased before most people arrive. Miguel looked down at his hands that had spent years cleaning classrooms rather than filling them with new ideas. When he looked up, there was a cautious hope in his eyes. What would this mean exactly? To start, a stipend. Not a fortune, but better than custodial wages. You'd work directly with me, documenting your approach to the Donovan sequence. When we make significant progress, we publish. Together. And my job, I still need to support my daughter. You'd reduce your custodial hours. Work with me during the day. We can figure out a schedule that works for your family situation. Miguel was quiet for a long moment. Why are you doing this? You don't know me. Rebecca considered her answer carefully. Because mathematics doesn't care who solves its puzzles, Miguel. It doesn't care about degrees or pedigrees. It cares About truth and beauty. What I've seen on that board is true and beautiful, and I want to help bring it to completion." She paused. "And selfishly, I've spent years thinking about this problem. Working with you might be my only chance to see. It's solved in my lifetime." A small smile crossed his face. "At least you're honest." "Is that a yes?" "It's a I need to think about it. This isn't just my decision. I have Carmen to consider." Rebecca nodded. "Of course. Take whatever time you need." She pulled out a business card and wrote her cell number on the back. "Call me when you decide, or if you have questions. And Miguel, regardless of what you choose, please don't stop working on this problem. It would be a loss to mathematics if you did." As they gathered their things to leave, Rebecca noticed Miguel carefully folding the napkins with his notations and placing them in his backpack. "You know," she said, "most mathematicians I know have boxes of napkins with half-formed proofs on them. You're in good company." He smiled, a genuine warm smile that transformed his serious face. "Then maybe I'm a mathematician after all." "I never doubted it," Rebecca replied. The October sky had darkened by the time Miguel reached the small apartment he shared with his 9-year-old daughter, Carmen. The building was in one of the older neighborhoods of Lakewood, far from the manicured lawns of Westridge University. Paint peeled from the exterior, and the stairwell lighting flickered unreliably. But inside their 2-bedroom unit, Miguel had created a haven of order and warmth. Mrs. Patel, their elderly neighbor who watched Carmen after school, looked up from a book as Miguel entered. "She's finishing her homework," she said with a smile. "Such a serious student, your daughter." Miguel thanked her with a small box of tea he had picked up on his way home, a monthly gesture of gratitude for her kindness. After Mrs. Patel left, he found Carmen at the kitchen table, surrounded by textbooks and colored pencils, her dark hair falling across her face as she concentrated on a math worksheet. "Hey, Carino," he said softly. Carmen looked up, her face brightening. "Dad, you're late today." "I had a meeting." He set his backpack down and came to look over her shoulder. "Fractions?" She nodded. "They're not as hard as everyone says." Miguel smiled, recognizing his grandmother's gift flowing through another generation. "Nothing is as hard as people say once you understand it." They ate dinner together, simple rice and beans with vegetables, while Carmen told him about her day, about the science project she was planning, about how her teacher had praised her problem-solving skills. Miguel listened attentively, asking questions, his heart full with the simple joy of this ritual they shared. Only after Carmen was in bed, after the dishes were done and the apartment quiet, did Miguel allow himself to think about Dr. Collins's offer. He sat at the kitchen table, spreading out his notes on the Donovan sequence. The problem had been his secret companion for years, a private conversation between his mind and the universe. The prospect of bringing it into the light, of working on it openly, filled him with both excitement and dread. What if he wasn't good enough? What if his lack of formal training meant he was missing something fundamental? What if the academic world looked at his work and found it wanting? He thought of his grandmother, Eleanor. She had recognized something in him when he was just a boy, the same age Carmen was now. "You see the world in numbers," she had told him, "just as I do. Never let anyone tell you that you cannot understand what you can see so clearly." Elena had died before she could see Miguel graduate high school, before life's complications had derailed his education. But he had kept his promise to her in his own way. He had never stopped learning, never stopped seeing the patterns that made the universe comprehensible. He pulled out Dr. Collins' card, running his thumb over the embossed logo of Westridge University. The opportunity she offered was more than a job. It was a doorway to a world he had glimpsed only through the library windows, a world where his mind might finally find the challenges it craved. But it would mean change. For him, for Carmen. It would mean stepping out of the shadows, claiming space in rooms where people like him rarely stood. It would mean risk. Miguel closed his eyes, seeing again the equations on the chalkboard of Lecture Hall 118. There was more to come, he knew. The solution was taking shape in his mind, growing clearer each day. Could he really turn away from the chance to bring it to completion? His decision came not as a sudden revelation, but as a quiet certainty. He would call Dr. Collins tomorrow. He would accept her offer, not for recognition, not for prestige, but because the Donovan sequence deserved to be solved, and somehow, against all odds, he had found the path to its resolution. That night, Miguel dreamed of chalkboards stretching to infinity, covered in the elegant dance of mathematics that had always been his true language. For the first time in years, the dream felt not like an escape, but like a premonition. The department meeting room in Pearson Hall was designed to impress. Cherrywood table, leather chairs, walls lined with mathematical texts spanning centuries. Rebecca had chosen it deliberately for this meeting, wanting to lend gravity to the proposal she was about to make. Across from her sat Dr. Thomas Wilson, the department chair, a man whose reputation for traditional academic values was matched only by his genuine commitment to mathematical excellence. You want to hire a night janitor as a research assistant on one of the most significant open problems in our field, Dr. Wilson repeated, his tone carefully neutral. Rebecca slid a folder across the table. Inside were the photographs she had taken of Miguel's work, alongside her own analysis. I want to hire a mathematician who happens to currently work as a custodian. And yes, I believe he's on the verge of solving the Donovan sequence. Dr. Wilson opened the folder, his expression skeptical. But as he studied the contents, his eyebrows rose slightly, the closest thing to surprise he typically displayed. This approach is unorthodox. Precisely why it might succeed where orthodox methods have failed, Rebecca countered. William Donovan himself was known for lateral thinking. That's why his problems have always demanded creative solutions. Wilson continued studying the pages. And you're confident this work is original, not copied from unpublished sources? Rebecca felt a flare of indignation, but kept her voice level. I've watched him work, Thomas. He derives these steps intuitively. His understanding is deeply personal and completely authentic. What's his background? Limited formal education. His grandmother was a mathematician in Mexico. He's largely self-taught. Wilson leaned back in his chair. You're asking for a significant exception to our hiring policies. I'm asking for exactly what this department claims to value, mathematical innovation regardless of its source. Rebecca met his gaze steadily. Unless that's just something we put in brochures. A thin smile crossed Wilson's face. Always direct, Rebecca. He closed the folder. Let's say I'm intrigued enough to consider it. What exactly are you proposing? A 6-month research assistant position reporting directly to me, standard stipend. If we make significant progress, we reevaluate. And if you don't, then I was wrong, and the department has lost nothing but a modest investment. Wilson tapped his fingers on the folder, thinking, I'd need to meet him myself, and you'll need to secure at least 2 other faculty endorsements. Rebecca felt a surge of hope. This wasn't a no. Professor Zhang in applied mathematics has already reviewed his work and is supportive. I believe Professor Lawson would be as well. Professor Harrington should also review it. As our resident expert on combinatorial analysis, his opinion would carry weight. Rebecca tensed. James Harrington was notoriously traditional in his views on academic credentials. He had opposed exceptions in the past, arguing that standards were standards for a reason. But she knew better than to object. I'll speak with him today. Wilson stood, signaling the end of the meeting. Send me the formal proposal by Friday. Include all endorsements you secure." He handed the folder back to her. "And Rebecca, I appreciate your passion for this, but remember that our institution has protocols for a reason. Exceptional cases must truly be exceptional. Miguel Reyes is exceptional," she said simply. "You'll see." As she left the department chair's office, Rebecca felt both encouraged and apprehensive. The path forward was opening, but it would require navigating the complex politics of academia, something Miguel's mathematical brilliance had not prepared him for. In her office, Rebecca found a voicemail from Miguel agreeing to her proposal. His voice was calm, resolute. "I want to see this through," he had said. "Not just for me, but for my grandmother, for my daughter, for the problem itself. It deserves to be solved." Rebecca smiled, feeling a renewed sense of purpose. The next step would be more challenging, introducing Miguel to her colleagues, particularly the skeptical Professor Harrington. She would need to prepare Miguel for the scrutiny he would face, the questions that would probe not just his mathematical understanding, but his very right to claim space in their academic world. As she began drafting emails to arrange these meetings, Rebecca glanced at the photo of the chalkboard that now served as her computer background. The elegant notations reminded her why this mattered, not just for Miguel, not just for her, but for mathematics itself. Great problems deserved great solvers, regardless of where they came from, and she was increasingly convinced that in Miguel Reyes, the Donovan sequence had found its voice. The next morning, Rebecca arrived at Lecture Hall 118 early again, hoping to catch Miguel before he finished his shift. The board was filled with new work, a crucial development in the middle section of the proof where the sequence folded back on itself. She studied it carefully, taking photos, making notes, her excitement growing with each line she traced. When Miguel entered to clean the room, they greeted each other with the comfortable familiarity of collaborators. "You've made progress," she said, gesturing to the board. Miguel nodded, setting down his cleaning cart. "I had a breakthrough last night. The recursion pattern I was struggling with. I finally saw how to resolve it." "This is brilliant, Miguel, truly." She turned to face him fully. "I spoke with my department chair yesterday. He's cautiously open to the research position we discussed, but there are some hoops we'll need to jump through." Miguel's expression grew guarded. "What kind of hoops?" "Meetings with key faculty, members who would need to endorse the appointment, formal interviews. It's procedural but important." He absorbed this information silently. Then, "Will they ask about my background, my education?" "Yes," Rebecca answered honestly. "They will, and we should be prepared for that. But Miguel, what matters most is your work, your understanding of this problem. That's what will convince them in the end." Miguel looked at the chalkboard, at the mathematics that had flowed from his mind. "When I was a boy, my grandmother told me that mathematics doesn't care who you are or where you come from. It only cares that you listen carefully to what it's trying to tell you." He turned back to Rebecca. "I've been listening to this problem for 3 years. I'm ready to tell others what I've heard." Rebecca smiled, relieved by his resolve. "Good, because the first meeting is tomorrow afternoon with Professor James Harrington. He's brilliant but traditional. His support would be valuable." Miguel nodded, a quiet determination settling over his features. "I'll be ready." As Rebecca left him to finish his work, she couldn't help but feel that they were standing at the threshold of something significant. The invisible mathematician was about to step into the light, and the academic world of Westridge University would never be quite the same. Professor James Harrington's office reflected his approach to mathematics, meticulous, organized, and deeply traditional. Books lined the shelves in perfect alphabetical order. papers were stacked with geometric precision, and the certificates on the wall hung in chronological sequence. When Miguel entered alongside Dr. Collins, he felt immediately out of place. In this shrine to academic accomplishment, Harrington rose from behind his desk, his expression carefully neutral as he extended his hand. "Mr. Reyes, I presume. Professor James Harrington. I've heard quite a bit about you." Miguel shook his hand firmly. "Thank you for meeting with me, Professor. Please, sit." Harrington gestured to the chairs facing his desk. As they settled, he fixed his gaze on Miguel. "Dr. Collins has shared some of your work with me. I must admit, I was skeptical at first. The Donovan sequence has broken more promising careers than I can count." Rebecca interjected, "Miguel's approach is unlike anything published so far. That's why I believe—" Harrington held up a hand. "If you don't mind, Rebecca, I'd prefer to hear directly from Mr. Reyes." He turned back to Miguel. "Tell me how you encountered this problem." Miguel recounted the story as he had to Rebecca, finding the fragment of the problem on the chalkboard, his growing fascination, the years spent studying it in stolen moments. As he spoke, he could sense Harrington watching him closely, looking for signs of uncertainty or fabrication. "And your mathematical background?" Harrington asked finally. "Where did you study?" "I'm largely self-taught," Miguel replied, meeting the professor's gaze. "My grandmother was a mathematician in Mexico. She recognized my interest early and encouraged it. After high school, I took some community college courses, but couldn't complete a degree due to financial constraints." Harrington leaned back. "So no formal training in advanced analysis or combinatorial theory?" "Not in a classroom, no. But I've studied these subjects extensively on my own. The library has been my university." A thin smile crossed Harrington's face. "Admirable, but mathematics at this level typically requires structured guidance, peer review, the refinement that comes from formal academic discourse." Miguel felt his confidence wavering, but remembered his grandmother's words. "With respect, Professor, mathematics requires clear thinking and persistent inquiry. The structure helps many, but it isn't the only path to understanding." Harrington's eyebrows rose slightly. He reached for a folder on his desk and extracted several pages of equations, Miguel's work from the chalkboard. "Walk me through this section," he said, pointing to a particularly complex passage. "Specifically, how did you derive this transformation?" For the next 45 minutes, Miguel explained his methodology, responding to Harrington's increasingly technical questions with calm clarity. He drew connections that surprised the professor, referenced theorems he had discovered independently, and articulated insights that demonstrated not just intuition, but deep mathematical reasoning. By the end, the initial skepticism in Harrington's eyes had given way to something more complex, not quite acceptance, but a reluctant recognition that could not be easily dismissed. "Your approach is unorthodox," Harrington said finally, "but I cannot deny that it shows genuine insight." He turned to Rebecca. "I'm not prepared to endorse this appointment unreservedly, but I won't block it either. I would, however, like to remain involved, perhaps as a secondary advisor, to provide some structure." Rebecca nodded, knowing this was likely the best outcome they could hope for from Harrington. "We'd welcome your input, James." As they left Harrington's office, Miguel exhaled deeply. "That was intense." Rebecca smiled. "You did remarkably. Well, Harrington doesn't give ground easily, and he just made room for you. He still doesn't fully believe in me. He believes in your mathematics. The rest will come." Over the next 2 weeks, similar meetings followed. Professor Zhang from Applied Mathematics was immediately enthusiastic, seeing connections between Miguel's work and her own research in pattern recognition. Professor Lawson, an elderly topologist with wild white hair and mismatched socks, spent their entire meeting excitedly scribbling additional notes and asking Miguel about potential extensions of his approach. By the end of the month, Rebecca had secured the necessary endorsements, and Dr. Wilson had approved the special appointment. Miguel Reyes' transition from night cleaner to research assistant in the mathematics department was not without complications. His new schedule, working days with Dr. Collins while maintaining reduced evening hours on the custodial staff, meant careful coordination with Carmen's school and Mrs. Patel's availability. The increased income helped, but the real challenge was navigating the stark contrast between his worlds. During the day, he sat in Rebecca's office or the department's research commons, documenting his approach to the Donovan sequence in meticulous detail, engaging with faculty and graduate students who came to discuss his work. At night, he still cleaned classrooms and emptied trash cans, now in the psychology building across campus. Some of the same professors who consulted with him by day barely acknowledged him in the evenings when they encountered him with his cleaning cart. Miguel said nothing about these interactions to Rebecca. This wasn't her burden to carry. Instead, he focused on the work, on bringing the scattered insights in his mind into a cohesive, rigorous proof that would stand up to the scrutiny of the mathematical community. One evening in late November, as Miguel vacuumed the hallway outside the psychology department offices, he overheard two faculty members talking as they locked up for the night. "Collins's pet project," one said, not realizing Miguel was around. "The corner. Harrington says the man can barely follow standard notation. Seems like a publicity stunt to me," the other replied. "Westridge discovers hidden genius in the janitorial staff, makes for a nice human interest story, but serious mathematics." Miguel's hands tightened on the vacuum handle, but he kept working, kept his face impassive as they passed him with brief, uncomfortable nods. Their words stung, but he had heard worse. What bothered him more was the implication that Dr. Collins had found him for publicity, not for the mathematics itself. That night, after putting Carmen to bed, Miguel sat at his small kitchen table and stared at his notes. Doubt crept in like a shadow. Was he fooling himself? Was his work really significant? Or had his isolation from the academic mainstream led him to reinvent approaches that had already been tried and abandoned? His phone buzzed with a text from Rebecca. "Made copies of your latest work for Zhang and Wilson. Both very impressed. Meeting tomorrow at 10? Miguel replied with a simple confirmation, but the message eased some of his uncertainty. Whatever. Others might think Rebecca's belief in his work was genuine. She had put her own academic reputation on the line for him. He couldn't let his doubts undermine that faith. The next morning, Miguel arrived at the mathematics building not through the service entrance, as he had for years, but through the main doors. He still felt strange walking these halls in daylight, dressed in casual clothes rather than his gray uniform. Students glanced at him curiously as he made his way to Rebecca's office, some recognizing him as the subject of growing department gossip, the janitor working on the unsolvable problem. Rebecca was waiting, her desk covered with papers and open textbooks. "Good morning," she said brightly. "I've been cross-referencing your approach with historical attempts at the Donovan sequence. Your insight about the recursive elements is genuinely novel. No one has taken this direction before." Miguel set down his backpack. "I've been wondering about that. If I'm missing something obvious that others have already explored." Rebecca shook her head. "Not obvious, no. What's remarkable about your work is that it sidesteps the computational complexities that have trapped other attempts. You're following the problem's natural contours rather than forcing it into existing frameworks." She handed him a stack of papers, printouts of academic articles on the Donovan sequence spanning the last 15 years. "I've marked the key attempts and where they diverged from your path. I thought seeing this might help you contextualize your work within the field." Miguel accepted the papers with quiet gratitude. Rebecca understood his need to place himself within the mathematical conversation, to know that his contribution was neither redundant nor misguided. "There's something else," she added, her tone shifting. "The department is hosting a symposium next month on open problems in combinatorial analysis. Dr. Wilson suggested you present your current progress on the Donovan sequence as part of the program." Miguel looked up sharply. "Present? To an audience?" "A small one. Mostly faculty and graduate students from our department and a few visitors from nearby universities." She studied his reaction. "It would help establish your presence in the academic community. Give your work official recognition." Miguel's heart raced at the thought of standing before a room of formally trained mathematicians, explaining work he had developed in isolation. What if they find fundamental flaws? What if I can't answer their questions properly? That's the point of academic discourse, Miguel. To test ideas, to strengthen them through challenge. And you won't be alone. I'll help you prepare, be there. When you present. She leaned forward. "You've been working in the shadows long enough. It's time to bring your mathematics into the light." After a long pause, Miguel nodded. "Okay, I'll do it." "Good." Rebecca smiled encouragingly. "Now, let's focus on that middle section of the proof. I think we're getting close to a breakthrough." For the rest of the morning, they worked side by side, Rebecca helping Miguel formalize his intuitive leaps into rigorous mathematical language. The upcoming presentation loomed in his mind, but the work itself, the pure, absorbing challenge of the Donovan sequence, helped quiet his anxiety. Here, in the dance of symbols and patterns, he knew who he was. News of Miguel's appointment and upcoming presentation spread quickly through Westridge's mathematics department. Most reactions were a mix of curiosity and cautious interest, but not all were supportive. Professor Harrington, despite his qualified endorsement, continued to express reservations about the irregular nature of the situation in faculty meetings. Others whispered that Dr. Collins had been too easily charmed by a compelling story, that real mathematics required more than intuition and self-study. One afternoon, as Miguel worked alone in the research commons, a young woman approached his table. She was Asian American, dressed in the casual attire of a graduate student, with intelligent eyes that studied him with undisguised interest. "You're Miguel Reyes," she said. It wasn't a question. Miguel looked up. "Yes, I'm Olivia Chen, second-year PhD student. I've been following your work on the Donovan sequence." She gestured to the empty chair across from him. "May I?" He nodded, and she sat down, setting her own notebooks on the table. "I'm focusing on computational approaches to combinatorial optimization for my dissertation. When I heard about your method, I was intrigued. It's completely contrary to current trends in the field." Miguel wasn't sure if this was criticism or compliment. "I didn't develop it with trends in mind." Olivia smiled. "That's exactly what makes it interesting. Everyone else has been approaching the Donovan sequence with increasingly complex computational models, trying to brute force their way through the recursive barriers. But you're doing something more elegant." She tapped her pen on her notebook. "I was wondering if you'd be willing to walk me through your thinking on the central transformation. The part where you reframe the sequence as a topological problem, rather than a purely algebraic one." For a moment, Miguel was taken aback. This was the first time a student had approached him as a source of mathematical insight, not as an oddity or a department rumor. He hesitated, then opened his notebook to the relevant section. "It's like this," he began, sketching a diagram. "The traditional approach treats each term in the sequence as discrete, looking for patterns in their relationships. But I kept seeing the sequence as a continuous flow, more like a landscape with features that repeat at different scales." Olivia leaned forward, her eyes lighting up with understanding. "You're treating it as a fractal system." "Essentially, yes. The recursion isn't just numerical, it's structural. Each section of the sequence contains echoes of the whole. For the next hour, they exchanged ideas, Olivia bringing her computational perspective to bear on Miguel's more intuitive approach. It was the most natural mathematical conversation Miguel had experienced since beginning work at Westridge. No undercurrent of doubt about his credentials, just two minds exploring a shared fascination. As they wrapped up, Olivia gathered her notes. "This is genuinely groundbreaking, you know. When you present at the symposium, people will see that." She hesitated, then added, "Some of us already do. Don't let the old guard convince you otherwise." After she left, Miguel sat quietly, a new feeling settling over him. For the first time, he had glimpsed what it might be like to be accepted not as an exception or a curiosity, but as a mathematician among mathematicians. The thought both terrified and exhilarated him. The week of the symposium arrived with an unexpected complication. Carmen woke up Monday morning with a high fever, forcing Miguel to call Rebecca and explain that he couldn't come in. The presentation was scheduled for Thursday afternoon, and they had planned to use these final days for intensive preparation. "Don't worry about today," Rebecca assured him. "Focus on Carmen. We'll adjust." By Tuesday, Carmen's fever had broken, but regulations required she stay home from school for another 24 hours. Miguel arranged for Mrs. Patel to watch her while he went to campus for a few hours of crucial preparation with Rebecca. When he arrived at her office, Rebecca handed him a cup of coffee and a printout of the symposium program. Miguel's name was listed alongside distinguished professors and advanced doctoral candidates. Miguel Reyes, Research Assistant, Department of Mathematics, a new approach to the Donovan sequence. Seeing his name in print, officially affiliated with Westridge University, Miguel felt a surge of conflicting emotions: pride, anxiety, and a lingering sense of unreality. This was actually happening. "We need to finalize your presentation slides," Rebecca said, getting straight to work. "I've put together a basic template based on your notes, but you should decide what to emphasize." For the next 3 hours, they refined the presentation, focusing on making Miguel's unconventional approach accessible without diluting its mathematical rigor. They anticipated potential questions, practiced key explanations, and worked through particularly complex sections until Miguel could articulate them with confidence. As they finished, Rebecca noticed Miguel's expression. "You're worried about something beyond the usual presentation nerves." Miguel hesitated, then admitted, "I'm worried about being there as myself, not just my mathematics." Rebecca understood immediately. Most presenters at the symposium would have impressive credentials, degrees from prestigious institutions, years of formal training, publications in respected journals. Miguel had none of these external validations, only the intrinsic value of his work and mind. "Your presence there matters, Miguel, not just for you, but for others who might never see themselves reflected in these academic spaces." She closed her laptop. When William Donovan first proposed this sequence, he was an outsider too. Brilliant but unconventional, often dismissed by the establishment. Now his problems define the field. "Remember that on Thursday." Miguel nodded, grateful for her perspective but still uncertain. As he prepared to leave, Rebecca added, "Oh, and Miguel, wear whatever makes you comfortable. The mathematics will speak for itself." Thursday dawned clear and cold. Miguel woke early, helped Carmen get ready for school, and then stood before his small closet, considering Rebecca's parting advice. After some deliberation, he chose dark jeans, a white button-down shirt, and the one blazer he owned, purchased years ago for a cousin's wedding. Professional but not pretending to be something he wasn't. Carmen noticed his outfit as they ate breakfast. "You look like a teacher, Dad." Miguel smiled. I'm giving a talk at the university today about mathematics. Her eyes widened, like the real mathematicians are going to listen to you. Something like that. Carmen beamed with pride. Grandma Elena would think that's really cool. Miguel felt a lump in his throat. Yeah, she would. After dropping Carmen at school, Miguel made his way to campus, his presentation notes securely in his backpack, along with a small photograph of his grandmother that he had tucked into the front pocket for moral support. He met briefly with Rebecca to review last-minute details, then waited as the symposium's morning sessions unfolded. The venue was a medium-sized lecture hall in the mathematics building, filled with about 60 people, mostly faculty and graduate students from Westridge, along with visitors from neighboring institutions. Miguel recognized a few faces. Olivia, Chen sitting near the front, Professor Zhang in the second row, Dr. Wilson at the back. Professor Harrington sat off to the side, his expression unreadable. When it was finally time for Miguel's presentation, Rebecca introduced him with a brief, professional summary of his work on the Donovan sequence, deliberately omitting the unusual circumstances of his discovery. Then Miguel stood at the podium, facing the collected expertise of the mathematical community he had observed from the margins for so long. "Good afternoon," he began, his voice steadier than he expected. "For the past 3 years, I have been working on a new approach to the Donovan sequence, viewing it not as a series of discrete terms, but as a continuous mathematical landscape with recursive properties." As he spoke, his initial nervousness gave way to the familiar clarity he felt when immersed in the mathematics itself. He guided the audience through his methodology, from his initial intuitions to the formal structure he had developed with Rebecca's help. The slides displayed the elegant notation they had refined together, alongside visual representations of how he conceptualized the sequence's behavior. When he reached the central transformation, the part that departed most dramatically from conventional approaches, he could sense the shift in the room. Some leaned forward, intrigued. Others frowned, mentally testing his assertions against established theory. Professor Harrington made rapid notes, his pen moving with increasing urgency. This reframing allows us to bypass the computational barriers that have stalled previous attempts, Miguel explained, indicating a crucial diagram. Instead of fighting the sequence's complexity, we embrace its structural recursion, finding order in what appears to be chaos. He concluded by acknowledging the work still to be done, the final sections of the proof that remained elusive, but were now, he believed, within reach. "The Donovan sequence is not just a mathematical puzzle," he said. "It's a reminder that patterns often reveal themselves only when we're willing to view them from unexpected perspectives." When he finished, there was a moment of silence, then applause, polite at first, then growing warmer as Professor Zhang nodded enthusiastically, and Olivia broke into a genuine smile. Dr. Wilson opened the floor for questions, and several hands went up immediately. A visiting professor from a nearby university spoke first. "Your topological interpretation is fascinating, but how do you address the convergence issues in the latter terms of the sequence?" Miguel explained his approach to convergence, sketching additional diagrams on the whiteboard to illustrate. More questions followed, some supportive, some challenging, all engaged with the mathematics rather than the unusual circumstances of its development. Then Professor Harrington stood. The room quieted. "Mr. Reyes," he began, his tone formal, "your presentation suggests a solution pathway that contradicts several established theorems in recursive analysis. Are you aware of Kelsey's work on finite sequence boundaries?" Miguel felt a momentary flash of panic. He wasn't familiar with the reference. This was exactly the kind of academic knowledge his self-education might have missed. He took a deep breath. I'm not familiar with Kelsey's specific theorems, he admitted honestly. But the approach I've outlined doesn't require contradicting established boundaries. It reinterprets the sequence's structure in a way that makes those boundaries less relevant to the solution. Harrington pressed further. You're claiming, then, that your model supersedes existing theory? Not supersedes, Miguel clarified, gaining confidence. It operates alongside it, offering a complementary perspective. Mathematics has room for multiple valid interpretations, especially when they lead to new insights. A murmur of approval ran through parts of the audience. Harrington's expression remained stern, but he gave a slight nod before sitting down. The questioning continued for another 15 minutes, with Miguel responding thoughtfully to each inquiry, occasionally deferring to Rebecca for additional context, but largely standing on the strength of his own understanding. When the session concluded, several attendees approached Miguel to continue the discussion, including 2 graduate students who asked if they could consult with him on applications of his approach to their own research. Olivia gave him a thumbs up from across the room. Even Dr. Wilson came forward to offer a brief but genuine compliment. Well articulated, Mr. Reyes. You've given us all something substantive to consider. As the crowd dispersed, Miguel found himself face to face with Professor Harrington. The older mathematician studied him for a moment before speaking. Your knowledge has significant gaps, Mr. Reyes, he said finally. But your insight is undeniable. I would recommend some targeted reading to strengthen the theoretical foundations of your work. If you're interested, I could provide guidance. Miguel recognized the olive branch for what it was. I would appreciate that, Professor. Thank you. Harrington nodded curtly and walked away, leaving Miguel with the distinct impression that he had passed some unspoken test. Rebecca joined him as the room emptied. That, she said quietly, was a triumph. Miguel let out a long breath. It wasn't perfect. There were questions I couldn't fully answer, references I didn't know. And yet you held your own with some of the most critical minds in the field. The mathematics community is beginning to see what I saw that first morning in Lecture Hall 118. She smiled. How does it feel? Miguel considered the question. The fear hadn't disappeared entirely, nor had the sense of being an outsider. But alongside those feelings was something new, a growing confidence not just in his mathematical insights, but in his right to share them, to participate in the conversation. It feels like a beginning, he said finally. As they gathered their materials to leave, Rebecca's phone chimed with an email notification. She glanced at it, then looked up at Miguel with wide eyes. It's from the International Mathematical Journal. They're interested in publishing a preliminary paper on our approach to the Donovan sequence. They must have had a representative at the symposium. Miguel stared at her in disbelief. Publication in a peer-reviewed journal was the gold standard of academic validation, something he had never imagined for himself. Our approach, he repeated. Your approach, Rebecca corrected. With my contributions noted, of course, but this is your work, Miguel, your insight, your mathematics. She squeezed his arm. The world is starting to listen. As they walked together across the campus, now darkening in the early winter evening, Miguel thought about the journey that had brought him here. From quiet nights cleaning empty classrooms to standing before a room of mathematicians as a peer rather than a shadow. There was still so much of the path ahead unknown, so much work to be done on the Donovan sequence, so many barriers yet to navigate. But for now, for this moment, Miguel Reyes walked through Westridge University not as someone passing unseen along its margins, but as someone who belonged in its intellectual heart. The equation that had whispered to him in the silence of midnight 3 years ago was now speaking to others through his voice. and they were beginning to hear its music. Winter descended on Lakewood, transforming Westridge University's campus into a landscape of snow-covered Gothic architecture and crystalline pathways. The semester was drawing to a close, and with it came a flurry of end-of-term activities, final examinations, and the annual publication of the Mathematics Department's Research Digest. For the first time in its 20-year history, the cover featured work from someone without an advanced degree. Miguel Reyes' innovative approach to the Donovan sequence dominated the publication, complete with elegant diagrams and formalized notation developed during his months of collaboration with Dr. Rebecca Collins. The response to their preliminary paper in the International Mathematical Journal had been overwhelming. Mathematicians from universities across the country and beyond had reached out, some with questions, others with critiques, many with genuine excitement about a fresh perspective on a problem that had stymied the field for so long. What had once been a private conversation between Miguel and the chalkboard in Lecture Hall 118 had become a global mathematical discussion. On a Friday afternoon in mid-December, Rebecca called Miguel into her office. Snow fell softly outside the window as she handed him a letter printed on heavy stock paper with the embossed letterhead of the Mathematics Institute of Barcelona. "This arrived this morning," she said, unable to contain her smile. "They want to invite you to present at their annual symposium on combinatorial theory this spring. All expenses paid." Miguel stared at the invitation, his eyes widening as he registered what it meant. The Mathematics Institute of Barcelona was one of Europe's most prestigious research centers, known for its selective programming and influential faculty. "Barcelona," he said quietly. "My grandmother studied there briefly before coming to Mexico. She used to tell me stories about the city, the architecture, the mathematical traditions." Rebecca nodded. "I thought there might be a connection. It's almost poetic, you continuing her journey." Miguel ran his fingers over the embossed letterhead. "I never imagined something like this." He looked up at Rebecca. "But Carmen, I can't leave her for so long. The invitation includes accommodation for family members. Carmen could come with you. It would be an incredible experience for her too." The possibility settled over Miguel like a gentle weight, both exhilarating and sobering. "A month in Barcelona," he murmured, "teaching Carmen about her great-grandmother's home, showing her that mathematics can take you places." He folded the letter carefully. "I'll need to think about the logistics, but yes, I want to accept." Rebecca beamed. "Excellent. And there's more good news. Dr. Wilson wants to meet with us this afternoon. I think it's about extending your appointment." Miguel's current position as a research assistant was set to expire at the end of the academic year, and despite the growing recognition of his work, he had been quietly preparing himself for the possibility of returning full-time to custodial work. The mathematics had been a beautiful intermission, but he had never allowed himself to fully believe it could become his life. "You think they'll renew the position?" he asked cautiously. "I think they're going to do better than that," Rebecca replied, "but let's hear what Thomas has to say." And that afternoon, they sat in Dr. Wilson's office as snow continued to fall outside, creating a hushed atmosphere that matched the department chair's deliberate tone. "Your work on the Donovan sequence has attracted significant attention to our department," Wilson began, addressing Miguel directly rather than speaking through Rebecca as he sometimes had in early meetings. "The response to your symposium presentation and the subsequent paper has been quite remarkable." Miguel nodded, waiting for Wilson to continue. "The university administration has taken notice as well. They see an opportunity here, not just mathematically, but institutionally." Wilson leaned forward slightly. "They've authorized me to offer you a more permanent position, Mr. Reyes. A 3-year appointment as a research fellow in the mathematics department." with the possibility of further advancement depending on your continuing contributions and professional development. Miguel glanced at Rebecca, who smiled encouragingly but remained silent, allowing this moment to be between Miguel and the department chair. "What would the position entail?" Miguel asked. "Continued work on the Donovan sequence, of course. Publishing your findings. Yes, lecturing in advanced courses related to your expertise. Mentoring graduate students interested in your methodologies." Wilson paused. "And if you're amenable, completing some formal coursework yourself. Not for a degree necessarily, but to fill in any theoretical gaps in your background." Miguel thought of Professor Harrington's critique after the symposium. The offer wasn't just employment, it was a pathway to becoming a full member of the academic community he had observed from the margins for so long. "And my custodial position," he asked, "would need to be resigned," Wilson replied. "The fellowship is full-time, with a salary commensurate with junior faculty, substantially more than your current combined income." Miguel took a deep breath. "This is a generous offer, Dr. Wilson. May I have some time to consider it?" Wilson looked slightly surprised but nodded. "Of course, though I should mention the Barcelona invitation factored into the administration's decision. Having a Westridge researcher present at such a prestigious venue is valuable to the university." "I understand," Miguel said. "I'll have an answer for you by Monday." As they left Wilson's office, Rebecca turned to Miguel, her expression puzzled. "I thought you'd accept immediately. This is everything we've been working toward." Miguel adjusted his backpack. "It is, and I'm grateful. But this isn't just a job change, Rebecca. It's a life change. For me and for Carmen, I need to make sure I'm doing it for the right reasons." Rebecca studied him for a moment, then nodded. "Of course. Take the weekend to think it through. Call me if you want to talk it over." Miguel spent that evening sitting at his kitchen table long after Carmen had gone to bed. Before him lay the Barcelona invitation, Wilson's offer letter, and a worn photograph of his grandmother, Eleanor. In it, she stood on the steps of a university building, young and serious, mathematical texts clutched to her chest. The path that had been interrupted for her by marriage, by immigration, by the practical demands of raising a family in a new country, was now opening before him, extending beyond anything he had allowed himself to imagine. But with opportunity came questions that mathematics alone couldn't answer. What did it mean to leave behind one identity and step fully into another? What would he gain, and what might be lost? How would this transformation affect Carmen, whose world had always been defined by their modest but stable routine? Saturday morning, Miguel took Carmen to the public library, the place where his own mathematical education had largely taken place, among donated textbooks and borrowed journal issues. While she browsed the children's section, he found Frank Martinez, his former supervisor from the night maintenance crew, reading a newspaper in the periodical section. "Miguel," Frank said warmly, folding his paper. "Haven't seen you around much lately. Heard you're becoming quite the celebrity in the math department." Miguel smiled, sitting down across from him. "Hardly a celebrity, but things are changing. That's actually why I wanted to talk to you. The university has offered me a research position, full-time 3-year commitment." Frank's weathered face broke into a genuine smile. "That's fantastic. I always knew you were too smart to be pushing 'em up forever." "You never made me feel that way," Miguel said sincerely. "You treated me with respect from day one, gave me flexible shifts when Carmen was younger, covered for me more times than I can count." Frank waved a hand dismissively. "That's what people do for each other. But this opportunity, this is special, Miguel. You'd be crazy not to take it. It means leaving the custodial staff entirely, leaving the life I've known for years." Frank leaned forward. Listen to me. I've worked maintenance at Westridge for 27 years. I've seen hundreds of students and faculty come and go. What you've got, this mind of yours, this chance, it's rare. Don't let fear keep you cleaning floors when you could be solving problems that actually matter. The custodial work matters, Miguel insisted. It always has. Of course it does, but it's not what you were meant to do. We both know that. Frank's expression softened. Your grandmother didn't sacrifice so you could play it safe, Miguel. She wanted you to fly. Later that afternoon, Miguel took Carmen to a small cafe near their apartment. As she sipped hot chocolate, he explained as simply as he could the choices before them, the new job, the possibility of Barcelona, the changes that might come. Would we have to move? She asked, practical as always. Not right away, but eventually, maybe, to be closer to campus, somewhere a little nicer. She considered this carefully. Would you be happier, doing math all the time instead of cleaning? The directness of her question caught Miguel off guard. I think so. The mathematics, it feeds something in me that nothing else does. Carmen nodded solemnly. Grandma Elena would want you to do it. She always said your brain was special. She said the same about yours, Miguel reminded her with a smile. So we should go to Barcelona too. I want to see where she lived. Miguel reached across the table and squeezed his daughter's hand, marveling at the clarity children sometimes brought to adult decisions. Then it settled. It's settled, Carmen confirmed, dipping her cookie into her hot chocolate with an air of finality. Monday morning, Miguel arrived at Dr. Wilson's office with his decision. The department chair welcomed him with a more relaxed demeanor than usual, perhaps sensing the outcome before Miguel spoke. I've decided to accept the research fellow position, Miguel said, and the Barcelona invitation as well. Wilson nodded approvingly. Excellent. I'll have the formal paperwork prepared immediately. He extended his hand. Welcome to the faculty of Westridge University, Mr. Reyes, officially. As they shook hands, Miguel felt a sense of threshold crossing, of moving from one life into another. But this time, the transition wasn't happening in shadows or silence. This time, the doors were opening widely, visibly, with his name being called to enter. The next few months passed in a whirlwind of preparation, both mathematical and personal. Miguel and Rebecca worked intensively on developing their approach to the Donovan sequence, refining the proof for publication and preparing the expanded presentation for Barcelona. Simultaneously, Miguel began the coursework Wilson had suggested, filling in theoretical gaps in his mathematical background with the formal rigor of a traditional education. Professor Harrington, somewhat to everyone's surprise, became one of Miguel's most demanding but valuable mentors in this process. His initial skepticism had evolved into a grudging respect, then into a genuine intellectual engagement with Miguel's unorthodox perspective. Your intuition leaps ahead of your technical vocabulary, Harrington told him during one particularly challenging tutorial session. We need to bring them into alignment so others can follow your reasoning without having to make the same intuitive jumps. Miguel appreciated the older mathematician's exactitude, his insistence on precision. Harrington was teaching him not just mathematical theory, but the language and customs of a community he was joining as an adult, without the years of gradual acculturation that came with traditional academic progression. Meanwhile, Olivia Chen and several other graduate students had formed a working group around Miguel's approach, applying aspects of it to adjacent problems in combinatorial theory. Miguel met with them weekly, still sometimes uncomfortable in the role of expert, but growing more confident as he recognized the genuine value his perspective brought to their work. At home, life was changing too. The improved salary allowed Miguel to move Carmen into a slightly larger apartment in a safer neighborhood, closer to her school. He reduced her hours with Mrs. Patel, able now to be home in the evenings to help with homework and share dinner. The routines of their life shifted gently, expanding to include new possibilities while maintaining the close bond they had always shared. February brought the official announcement that Miguel and Rebecca's work would be published as a major article in the Annals of Mathematical Analysis, one of the field's most prestigious journals. Dr. Wilson organized a small reception in the Mathematics Department common room to celebrate, attended by faculty from across the university and even a representative from the president's office, eager to associate with what was becoming one of Westridge's most notable recent achievements. As glasses of sparkling cider were raised in toast, Miguel found himself standing beside Professor Harrington, slightly apart from the main group. "Did you ever imagine this?" Harrington asked quietly, gesturing toward the gathered crowd, the enlarged proof diagrams displayed on easels around the room. Miguel shook his head. "Never. For years, mathematics was something I did in stolen moments, something private. This is surreal." Harrington nodded thoughtfully. "I've been in academia my entire adult life, followed every prescribed step, published in all the right journals, served on all the proper committees." He took a sip of his drink. "And yet, I've never achieved what you've done in these few months, a truly original insight into a major, unsolved problem." Miguel wasn't sure how to respond to this unexpected vulnerability from the usually reserved professor. "It makes one question the paths we create and the barriers we maintain," Harrington continued. "How many other Miguel Reyeses are out there, I wonder? Minds with something to contribute, kept at the margins by circumstances or by our own institutional rigidity." Before Miguel could reply, Rebecca approached, smiling warmly. "The president's representative wants to meet you, Miguel. She's quite impressed by the international attention your work is receiving." As Miguel excused himself to follow Rebecca, Harrington raised his glass in a small, private toast. It was a gesture of collegial respect that meant almost as much to Miguel as the official recognition surrounding him. March arrived, bringing preparations for the Barcelona trip into high focus. Miguel and Carmen applied for passports, his first since childhood. Rebecca helped them navigate the logistics of international travel, academic presentations, and the protocol of the prestigious Mathematics Institute. Olivia offered to cat-sit for Carmen's recently adopted kitten, a rescue named Pythagoras, who had quickly become a beloved member of their small family. One evening, as Miguel packed Carmen's suitcase, she came to him with a photograph, the same one he had of Elena as a young woman at university. "Can we find this place in Barcelona?" she asked, pointing to the building in the background. Miguel studied the image. "I think that's one of the old university buildings. We can try to find it, yes." Carmen traced her great-grandmother's face with a small finger. "Do you think she knows about you solving the hard problem? About us going to her city?" Miguel sat on the edge of the bed, drawing Carmen close. "I don't know, but I like to think that somewhere, somehow, she does, that she's proud of both of us." Carmen leaned against him. "I'm going to learn Spanish better before we go, so I can talk to people there about math and stuff." Miguel kissed the top of her head, marveling at how children absorbed the values surrounding them, shaped their own identities in response to the stories they were told. Carmen was growing up with a narrative different from the one he had known. One where mathematics opened doors, where her heritage was a source of strength, where challenges existed to be solved rather than endured. The week before their departure for Barcelona, Miguel received an unexpected email from the Mathematics Institute. In addition to his scheduled presentation on the Donovan sequence, they were interested in having him participate in a panel discussion on non-traditional paths in mathematical research. The panel would include several other mathematicians with unusual backgrounds, a former concert pianist who'd become a number theorist in her 40s, a self-taught topology expert from rural India, and a retired military officer whose work on encryption had led to breakthroughs in abstract algebra. Miguel forwarded the invitation to Rebecca with a simple message. "They want me to talk about my journey, not just the mathematics." Her reply came quickly, "Because both matter. Your path to the Donovan sequence is as significant as the solution itself. It challenges assumptions about where mathematical insight comes from, who gets to participate in the conversation." After consideration, Miguel accepted the panel invitation, though the prospect of discussing his personal journey in such a public forum made him more nervous than presenting the technical work itself. His life had always been something he protected, kept separate from the world of ideas. Now they were converging in ways he was still learning to navigate. The day before their flight to Barcelona, Miguel took Carmen to visit Frank Martinez at the maintenance facility. Frank had been one of their strongest supporters throughout Miguel's transition, offering practical advice, occasional childcare, and the steady friendship of someone who understood the complexities of straddling different worlds. "All ready for the big trip?" Frank asked, showing them around the facility with obvious pride. Carmen nodded enthusiastically. "Dad packed too many books, though. He says they're for the plane, but I think he's scared of forgetting something." "For his talk." Frank laughed. "Your dad doesn't forget math, kiddo. It's part of him." He turned to Miguel. "The crew's real proud of you, you know. We've been following everything in the university newsletter, even got the article about your Barcelona presentation pinned up in the break room." Miguel felt a wave of emotion. "I wouldn't be here without this place, Frank. Without people like you who saw me as more than just the night cleaner." Frank waved away the sentiment. "You did the work. We just made some space for it." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small box. "The team wanted you to have this, for good luck over there." Inside was a simple but elegant pen, engraved, with Miguel's name and a small equation symbol. "So you can sign all those fancy mathematical papers," Frank explained with a grin. The gift was perfect, acknowledging both the world he came from and the one he was moving toward. "I'll use it to sign the first copy of the published proof," Miguel promised, "and I'll bring it back here to show everyone." As they left the maintenance building, Carmen asked, "Are you sad about not cleaning anymore, Dad?" Miguel considered the question. "Not sad, exactly, but I'm grateful for those years. I met good people, I supported us, and I found the Donovan sequence in the quiet hours of that job. And now you get to tell everyone about it, in Barcelona." "Yes," Miguel agreed, taking her hand as they walked across the campus that had transformed from a workplace into an intellectual home. "Now we get to tell everyone." The Barcelona Symposium exceeded every expectation. The Mathematics Institute was housed in a beautiful modernist building that somehow harmonized with the city's more ancient architecture. Inside, mathematicians from around the world gathered to exchange ideas, challenge assumptions, and celebrate the elegance of their shared language. Miguel's presentation on the Donovan sequence drew a standing room-only crowd. With Rebecca beside him offering occasional elaboration on technical points, he guided the international audience through the journey of his solution, from the initial intuitive leaps to the rigorous formalization they had developed together. Over the past months, the response was electric, with questions continuing well beyond the allotted time and conversations spilling into the hallways and coffee breaks that followed. But it was the panel on non-traditional paths that proved most personally meaningful. Seated alongside mathematicians whose journeys were as unconventional as his own, Miguel found himself speaking with unexpected openness about the nights spent cleaning classrooms, the mathematical education pieced together from library books, and overheard lectures the influence of his grandmother, and the morning when Rebecca Collins discovered his chalkboard work and changed the trajectory of his life. "Mathematics found me," he told the audience. "Even when I had no right to expect it would, even when every practical reality of my life pointed in a different direction." After the panel, a young woman approached him, introducing herself as a doctoral student from Mexico City. "My father was a janitor at UNAM," she said, naming Mexico's prestigious national university. "He used to bring me with him sometimes when he worked nights. I would sit in empty lecture halls and imagine I belonged there." She paused. "Now I do. And hearing your story, it feels like validation of something I've always known but couldn't articulate." Similar conversations followed throughout the week, with established mathematicians curious about his methodology, with students inspired by his journey, with educators questioning their assumptions about talent and opportunity. Miguel found himself increasingly comfortable in this role, not just as a mathematician, but as a symbol of possibility for others who might be watching from the margins. Carmen, meanwhile, was having her own transformative experience. The Institute had arranged for childcare and activities during the sessions, but she spent her free time exploring Barcelona with Miguel, visiting the places her great-grandmother had described. They found the university building from Elena's photograph, standing on the same steps where she had once posed with her mathematical texts. Carmen insisted on recreating the image, holding Miguel's conference materials in the same serious pose, creating a visual echo across 3 generations. On their final evening in Barcelona, Miguel and Carmen sat at an outdoor cafe in a small plaza, watching the city transition from day to evening. The architecture glowed golden in the fading light, and the gentle murmur of Catalan and Spanish. Conversations surrounded them. "Dad," Carmen said suddenly, "are you a famous mathematician now?" Miguel laughed softly. "No, not famous. Just someone who saw a pattern others hadn't noticed yet. But people listened to you, they asked you questions and wrote down what you said. They did. That's how mathematics works. We share ideas, challenge each other, build on what comes. Before." Carmen stirred her horchata thoughtfully. "I think Grandma Elena would be really happy that you're doing math in Barcelona, that people know who you are." Miguel looked at his daughter, 9 years old, and already understanding so much about legacy, about the threads that connected them across time and circumstance. "I think she'd be even happier about you, Carmen, about the person you're becoming." Carmen smiled, pleased by this assessment. "When we go home, is everything going to be different?" It was a perceptive question. The Barcelona Symposium marked a turning point, a full integration into the international mathematical community, a public recognition that would follow them back to Westridge and reshape their lives in ways both subtle and profound. "Some things will change," Miguel acknowledged, "but the important things stay the same. You and me, our home, the people who care about us." "And the math," Carmen added decisively. "The math stays the same too." Miguel smiled. "Yes, the math stays the same." Upon their return to Westridge, the final pieces of the Donovan sequence solution fell into place with almost poetic timing. The breakthrough came not in Lecture Hall 118 where it had begun, but in Miguel's new office in the mathematics department. A small but dignified space with a window overlooking the campus quad. Rebecca was with him when the critical insight emerged, the last knot in the proof unraveling under their combined scrutiny. "That's it," she whispered, staring at the completed equation. "Miguel, that's it. It's done." For a long moment they sat in silence, absorbing the reality that the 15-year-old problem, the one that had drawn them together, transformed Miguel's life and reshaped their understanding of mathematical possibility, was finally, truly solved. The proof was elegant, rigorous, and undeniable. "We should call Wilson," Rebecca said finally, "and Harrington. They'll want to verify independently, but I'm certain we've solved it." Miguel nodded, still staring at the completed work. "It feels strange, like saying goodbye to something that's been part of me for so long. That's how it always feels when you solve a significant problem. Satisfaction mixed with a peculiar sense of loss." Rebecca smiled. "But there are always new problems waiting. Mathematics doesn't run out of mysteries." The formal verification process took several weeks, with Harrington and 2 other senior faculty members scrutinizing every step of the proof. Their conclusion, delivered in a special department meeting, was unequivocal. The Reyes-Collins solution to the Donovan sequence was correct and complete. The 15-year-old problem had yielded to an approach no one had previously considered viable. Publication in the Annals of Mathematical Analysis followed, with an unprecedented editor's note acknowledging the unique genesis of the solution and its significance for the field. Universities around the country requested presentations. The story began to spread beyond mathematical circles, picked up by science journalists and educational publications as an example of untapped potential and the value of diverse pathways in STEM fields. Through it all, Miguel maintained the grounded perspective that had guided him through years of invisibility. He accepted speaking engagements selectively, prioritizing those at institutions serving first-generation students and underrepresented communities. He used the platform he'd gained to advocate for more flexible pathways into mathematical research, more resources for self-directed learners, more recognition of talent that didn't follow traditional trajectories. At Westridge, his position evolved from research fellow to assistant professor of mathematics, with his practical experience recognized as equivalent to certain formal educational requirements. He developed a new course called Intuitive Approaches to Complex Systems, which quickly became popular with students from across disciplines. And each semester, he volunteered to mentor first-generation students interested in mathematical research, creating the access he wished he'd had years earlier. Carmen thrived as well, excelling in school and developing her own passionate interest in mathematics and science. The apartment they had moved to after Miguel's appointment became a home filled with books, ideas, and frequent visitors. Olivia and other graduate students, Rebecca, even Frank and Mrs. Frank Patel for monthly dinner gatherings. What had once been a small, protected world expanded to include a community bound together by shared values and genuine affection. 1 year after the Barcelona Symposium, Westridge University hosted an international conference on combinatorial theory, with the Donovan sequence solution as its centerpiece. Mathematicians who had worked on the problem for decades came to discuss the implications of the Reyes-Collins approach, its applications to other unsolved problems, and the new research directions it had inspired. William Donovan himself, elderly, now but still sharp, made a rare public appearance to meet Miguel and Rebecca. The legendary mathematician, known for his reclusiveness and rigorous standards, spent an hour in conversation with them, exploring the nuances of their solution and sharing stories from his own unconventional path into mathematics. "The best problems," Donovan told them, his voice soft but intent, "are those that force us to abandon our comfortable methods. You did what others couldn't because you weren't constrained by knowing the right way to approach it." He smiled at Miguel. "Sometimes the path to insight requires stepping outside the established corridors of thought." On the final evening of the conference, Miguel found himself drawn back to Lecture Hall 118. The building was quiet, most attendees having moved to the reception in the university's grand hall. He unlocked the door with the faculty key that still sometimes felt strange in his pocket and stepped into the darkened room. For a moment, he stood in silence, remembering the first time he had entered this space as a night cleaner. the quiet hours spent with a mop and bucket while mathematical ideas took shape in his mind. He walked to the chalkboard, a different one now, the old board, having been replaced during renovations, and picked up a piece of chalk from the tray. In the dim light, Miguel began to write, not equations this time, but words. Simple, direct statements of gratitude for Eleanor, who planted the seed, for Carmen, who gave him purpose, for Rebecca, who saw possibility in a midnight scribble, for Frank, who treated him with dignity when he was invisible to others, for Harrington, who challenged him to be rigorous, for all those who had created space for his mind to flourish. As he wrote the final line, the door opened behind him. Rebecca stood there, a questioning smile on her face. The reception's in full swing. Everyone's asking for you. Miguel set down the chalk. Just making a private pilgrimage. This room is where everything changed. Rebecca came to stand beside him, reading his chalk message. It's easy to forget, isn't it, with all the recognition, all the speaking engagements, how it began with just you, a chalkboard, and an unsolved problem. Miguel nodded. I never want to forget. Not because I need to remember where I came from, but because I need to remember that insights can happen anywhere, in grand lecture halls, or in the quiet moments when no one's watching. He brushed chalk dust from his hands. There are other Miguel Reyeses out there, Rebecca, working night shifts, studying in public libraries, seeing patterns no one has trained them to recognize. And now they have you to look to, she said. Proof that their insights matter, that their perspectives have value. Miguel smiled, picking up his jacket from where he'd laid it across a desk. We should get back to the reception. I promised Carmen she could stay up for the closing remarks. As they walked out of Lecture Hall 118, Miguel glanced back at the chalkboard with its message of gratitude. He wouldn't erase it this time. Let it remain for students to find in the morning. A reminder that knowledge doesn't always flow from the expected sources, that problems sometimes yield to the most unlikely solvers, and that mathematics, like truth itself, belongs to anyone brave enough to pursue it. Throughout the following years, Miguel Reyes' story would be told and retold in universities and conferences, in books about mathematical breakthroughs, in profiles of innovators who defied conventional paths. But the truest version remained, written in the lives he touched, in Carmen, growing into a young woman with confidence in her heritage and her mind, in the students he mentored, especially those who recognized themselves in his journey, in the shifting policies at Westridge and beyond, making room for talent regardless of its origins, and in the continuing evolution of mathematics itself, a field made richer, more vibrant, and more human by the inclusion of voices once relegated to its margins. For what Miguel had proven, beyond the Donovan sequence itself, was that the language of patterns belongs to all who can hear its music, whether they learned it in prestigious classrooms or in the quiet corners of the world where insight sometimes waits to be discovered. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.